Hey, what's up everyone? Bill Lethman here for Money Evolution. And today's video is going to be kind of a response video to a fellow YouTuber, Chelsea Fagan from The Financial Diet. Now, I have to be honest, I haven't really watched a whole lot of Chelsea's videos, but I know she has a very big following on YouTube. I think she has over 600,000 subscribers, so obviously a lot of people are watching these videos. But one of them recently popped into my YouTube feed here a couple days ago called The 8 Financial Realities That Are Making Americans' Lives Terrible. So, of course, I had to see what that was all about. In fact, I actually watched it several times. So what I thought I'd do is kind of take this bullet point by bullet point and talk about some things that I agree with Chelsea on, but also some things that I think maybe I disagree with, or I think we should take a different approach to. So number one on her list is she talks about how most Americans aren't actually doing very well, despite some of the things we might hear or see on the news. And she has some pretty interesting statistics to kind of back that up. One of those is she talks about a recent report from the Federal Reserve where it talks about how 40% of Americans, if they were faced with just a $400 emergency expense, wouldn't have enough money in their bank account to cover that expense. And then she talks about how 75% of workers are actually living paycheck to paycheck. And I 100% agree with that. I think that hopefully we can do some things to try to correct that situation and get more people financially stable. Partly maybe by watching channels like this and watching channels like Chelsea to get more financial education behind us. But she talks about some systemic issues that are inherent within the country that are actually making it more difficult for us to get ahead as Americans. And she talks about how it can make us feel like we're actually failing. And she points out that it's not your fault. And so while I want to point out that, yes, there are certainly going to be some things that may be beyond your control. There's always going to be the people that are going to have a little bit easier. Some people that are maybe born into a wealthier family, or the kid that grows up to be 7 feet tall and is good with a basketball. But one thing that I want to point out is that we don't want to just sit back and have a woe is me type of an attitude and figure that there's things that we just can't fix or change, because I think there's always things that we can do. And while there's certainly going to be some things that are going to be beyond our control, the one thing that we absolutely have control over is how we react to a situation and how we pick ourselves up and move forward despite some of these obstacles that might be in our way. And that was really one of the main reasons that I wanted to make this video for, is to try to emphasize some of that point there. So number 2 on her list is she talks about how America is no longer really the land of opportunity. And quite honestly, this was really the biggest reason that I had for coming on and making this video here today. And she cites some interesting statistics to kind of back this up as well, mostly talking about upward social mobility. And she talks about how if you're born in one of the bottom 20% of income families in this country, that you really only have about a 7.8% chance of making it into one of those top 20% of income families. And this is contrary to what most people believe when they're asked this in polls, where they actually think they have maybe about a 12% chance of making it into that top 20%. So here's the interesting thing when it comes to statistics. If you think about that top 20% and breaking all of those income brackets down into quintiles, where you have 5 separate income levels, if you have 7.8% of the people making it from that bottom quintile up into the top quintile, doesn't that also mean that you have to have 7.8% of the people falling out of that top 20%? I mean, after all, we all can't be in the top 20%. So I think that gets a little bit misleading with that. But I also agree probably with what Chelsea's saying, is that hopefully we can raise that for everybody. We can raise the overall standard of living for everybody. And I think that is something that is truly happening over time. She also talks about millennials, and I think that's a big part of her audience. And she talks about how millennials may be the first generation to come along that don't do as well as their parents. And quite honestly, I don't think the jury is completely out on that yet. I think some of the oldest millennials might be in their mid-30s, and we probably said the same thing about previous generations. My parents were baby boomers, and I think a lot of people talked about them. They were all, hippies, and nobody wanted to work, and they'll never be as successful as the previous generation. And I think the jury is just not out on that. I think a lot of millennials may be making some, in my opinion, poor financial decisions, and that could be some of the result of why some of those millennials aren't doing as well as their parents. But again, that's one of the reasons that we have this channel here. That's one of the reasons that Chelsea has her channel, is to hopefully educate those. But the big thing that I wanted to talk about here as it pertains to the land of opportunity is I really think this is one of the best times that we're living in right now. So if you think about this just for a minute, and you think about Chelsea's channel there on YouTube. She has over 600,000 subscribers. She has tens of millions of views. I'm not sure exactly how much money Chelsea is making off of that, but I think it's probably a pretty decent amount when I compare that to other people's YouTube channels that I know how much they're making that maybe even have fewer subscribers than what Chelsea has. But if you think about that, that opportunity really just didn't even really exist even 10 years ago or 15 years ago especially. So if Chelsea or anybody wanted to be a financial commentator, I mean, we had very limited options. You know, we get a job working for the Wall Street Journal or Business Week or Forbes magazine. We could get on TV if we were lucky enough to do that, go work for CNBC or Fox Business. But today, anybody with a camera or quite honestly just a phone can video themselves, upload videos to YouTube, and potentially make money from that, whether it's their full-time gig or it's something that they're just doing part-time. Think about this, for example. 20 years ago, if you maybe wanted to pay off some bills or you were trying to get ahead a little bit and you wanted to make a little bit of extra money, your real only option was to go maybe get a second job. And that could be really difficult to do because now you've got to balance two work schedules and when am I working for this person and that person? Really difficult to balance. But today, things like driving for Uber exist where you could sign up for Uber, you could wake up on a Saturday morning, say I've got a few hours to kill, turn your phone on and start getting fares from taking people around maybe to the airport and back. Lots of different opportunities. You could start a blog. There's lots of side hustle things. One of my favorite people that talks about this a lot, Gary Vaynerchuk, he goes garage sailing. So here's a guy that's probably worth millions of dollars, and he does it to kind of prove a point to people that, if you're not happy with the financial situation that you're in, hop in your car, go drive around to some garage sales. He's buying these stuffed animals for 50 cents a piece, putting them on eBay, selling them for 10, 15, 20 bucks, and so that could be a side hustle that you could do. So the land of opportunity definitely exists. There's lots and lots of opportunities for this, lots of opportunities for education. This YouTube is just phenomenal. So if you think about it, you want to learn a skill or you want to, you could literally take college level courses for free online. Now you're not going to get credit for them, but you can learn a lot of this stuff here that might help you get ahead maybe in your job or your career, whatever it is that you're working on there. So this was one of the biggest things. It is the land of opportunity. Look around. There's all kinds of different things that you can do on that. Number 3 is the wedding industrial complex. And I had never heard this term before. In fact, my daughter, who's 18 years old, I asked her, have you ever heard of this before? And she watches all these, Say Yes to the Dress and these different wedding shows. I talked to my assistant, who's 25 years old. Sorry, Kendall, if I didn't get your age exactly right. But I said, have you ever heard of this wedding industrial complex before? And she hadn't heard of it. So, we've heard of like the military industrial complex where the government after World War II, had this huge defense spending ramp up there that was out of control. But I think what Chelsea's talking about here is with all of the social media, all of the stuff that's out there that's perpetuating people to spend more and more money on their weddings. And I don't think that's really a problem with America. It might be a problem with people needing to keep up with the Joneses, quite honestly, where they're seeing, hey, my friend did this, had this wedding, or my friend got a 1-carat ring, so I need to have at least that big, or, all these things we really kind of get wrapped up into. Whether it's your wedding or it's buying the new car, it's having the house, whatever that is, we want to be careful that we don't fall into the trap of just trying to keep up with everybody. Because really, as we find out very quickly in life, things really don't tend to make us happy. It's having experiences and having maybe a little bit less stress because we're not trying to pay that big mortgage. Those are things that can lead to, I think, more happiness over time. So my answer to number 3 is just stop doing it. If you don't have the money to spend on a wedding, just don't spend the money. Do what's reasonable. And she talks about how people that spend more money on a wedding are more likely to get divorced. That all might be true, but really there's a very simple answer to that, and that's just don't do it. Number 4 is another interesting one. She talks about how the rich don't play by the same rules. And quite honestly, we all play by the same set of rules. The laws are there for everybody to follow. Now, it is true that the rich do have certain advantages. They may have more capital to invest. They may have more opportunity to hire CPAs and attorneys that can maybe find some loopholes and things like that. She talks about, I think it was, bullshit ways to avoid paying taxes. So one of the things that we like to talk about a lot on our channel here is we like to help educate people in these same same opportunities exist for everybody. Maybe some do exist a little bit more for those upper income earners, but there's lots of, let's say, tax strategies, for example, that we talk about all the time on our channel that can help maybe reduce some of those taxes, invest a little bit smarter, let's say, for example. So I think that the fact that rich play by a different set of rules really isn't necessarily the case. So I don't 100% agree with her on that. A couple of these last ones, I do have a lot of agreement with Chelsea on these. I probably have a different approach on how I would go about solving for some of these things. But number 5 is she talks about we're paying way too much for healthcare. I totally 100% agree with that. I'm not going to get into this as a political discussion necessarily here, but we probably have a disagreement on how to fix that. I'm more of a free market person, so I think that having opportunity to maybe shop around for different types of insurance can bring some of those costs down, let these pharmaceutical companies compete with one another a little bit more to drive those prices down. Again, I'm not going to get into all the details on that, but I totally agree. We're paying way too much for healthcare here, so no disagreement there. And number 6 is another one that I agree with. College doesn't have to be so expensive. So a little bit about myself. I graduated from Michigan State in 1993. My very first year on campus, the entire fee was $6,000 for the year. That included my room and board. It included all of my tuition payments. Today, my son is enrolled at Michigan State, and it's about $25,000, $26,000 for the same education. You know, he lived in not the same dorm, but a neighboring dorm just like mine. No difference there, really. So the cost of college has gotten way, way out of control. And Chelsea actually has some really good statistics on this and talks about how a lot of that college increase didn't necessarily go to the faculty. It went to a lot of the administrators. And I forget what college she cited there, but she talks about how the number of administrators in these colleges has just skyrocketed here. So I agree with her on that. I'm going to do a video here probably this week where I'm going to talk about ways to maybe not rack up a whole bunch of college debt and talk about some things that I found to be helpful. So check that out. If we get that video up, I'll put a link in it in the description here below this. Number 7, another one that I 100% agree with Chelsea on. I think we're both trying to do a good job of financially educating people, but she talks about how most people just don't have basic financial literacy. And I didn't get into all the details here, but Chelsea talks a lot about even some of the predatory lending practices that happen with some of the lower class people, some of these used car shops that are charging astronomical interest rates to buy a car and overcharging people literally by thousands of dollars on a car that, you know, maybe should only really be worth $2,000, but charging somebody $4,000 because they just don't have any other options. So I think that, being more financially literate and learning some of these things and learning how to go out and maybe shop for a new car or how to make a smart housing decision, those are all things that we can all benefit from there, and in getting that word out there. When I was in high school, we had personal finance class. We had basic accounting. We had some of these more life skills classes, and I think at least my kids didn't really have a lot of that stuff offered to them in high school. So we're left to maybe learn it in college, but even if you went to school getting a CPA degree or a business degree, a lot of times you're looking at more of a corporate accounting or business, and you're not necessarily really learning practical everyday skills on what are the things that I need to look out for when I get a mortgage on my house, and how do I make sure that I'm paying a fair price. So those are all things that I think we both agree on. And then the last one is she talks about the stock market, and the stock market is not an indicator for how well the economy is doing. And again, I agree with her on that. The stock market is the valuations of individual companies. So a good example of this is, we'll use General Motors as an example here. They're going to be laying off some people here, unfortunately, and it's a very bad thing for those people affected. But the stock market might actually view that as a positive because they're looking at GM reducing their workforce and cutting some of their expenses. If they can cut their expenses enough, that may lead to more bottom line profit for the company. But in reality, that's a very bad thing for at least the economy as it pertains to those workers that may be displaced. So 100% don't pay attention to the stock market and think that just because the stock market's doing well or because the stock market's doing bad, that's necessarily bad for you and your financial situation, because that might be completely different there. So anyway, I hope that's been helpful. So those were 8 things. I think I've only done this one other time, made kind of a little bit of a rebuttal video to somebody, but my goal is not to completely throw Chelsea under the bus here and rip on everything she had to say, but I think we can take a different way to look at some of these things, and just remember that we still do have a lot of control over the things that happen in our lifetime, and we can kind of get ahead by making some of those smart decisions here. So anyway, hope you liked the video today. Remember, hit that like or subscribe button. Unfortunately, due to industry regulations, we are not allowed to have comments, which I'm sure this video might be one of those videos that gets a lot of comments. So, if you like what I had to say, give us a thumbs up. And if you kind of like what Chelsea had to say better, then give us a thumbs down. I don't care. We're just to kind of give us an idea. And if there's something that's really on your mind, you can always send me an email. We're hoping that at some point in the future, the regulations may change, or we may have an option to be able to put those comments on our YouTube channel. But for right now, unfortunately, industry makes us turn those off. So anyway, have a great day. I'll see you back in one of my next videos. Thanks.